Ken McCarthy is the author of John F. Kennedy, Anti-Imperialist. And I was tasked with reading this fairly lengthy book, but a very good book, JFK and RFK's Secret Battle Against Zionist Extremism, the documentary evidence. We've got a lot to cover this evening, and we're looking forward to this discussion. Ken McCarthy, welcome to Generational Change.
Well, thanks for having me.
Hi, is this your first time on our show?
First time.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so because I don't know, because I feel like it's kind of blurred together when I've spoken to you and had meetings like, what's the show? But welcome. I'm glad you could be here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's very cool. So Peter read this one. I know that that's probably not what you want to hear, but
Why not?
Well, we all like
Sounds good.
Depends on who's coming on. And this is definitely much more his like area of like, this is his thing. This is his jam. So he was the one who really read it, but I am looking forward to hearing all about this.
Great. You're smart when you let somebody else do the heavy lifting. And
sometimes it's me. Like
You're a busy person. You're a busy person. I know.
I totally wrote the art of the deal. I came up with every idea in that book. It was all me.
I've read plenty, although I prefer to be read too. But anyway.
Hey.
What was the impetus to write this book in the first place? You obviously have, I'm not trying to date you in any way, but you may or may not have been alive when Jack was assassinated. And this could just be like one of those, could be one of these life works that you've always wanted to do because his assassination never made sense. The explanation doubly didn't make sense. And I kind of feel like we've been kind of on this offshoot of what the American experiment was supposed to be. As a result of his assassination, we kind of got off track, and we've been off track ever since.
Well, if we take it that far back, I was 3 years old. But when I was about 10 or 11, I read a book, a conspiracy theory book from the library on the assassination of Kennedy. And I remember I'll never forget, I was late at night, had the lights on, I'm reading under the covers, and it dawned on me that, oh my God, they killed him. And the hairs just went up on my arms, you know. So that was my first experience of this information. Let's see, what else motivated me? Well, I wrote, you know, everybody, you always write for a particular audience, and I actually wrote this book with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in mind. I wrote it with the hope that he'd read it, and I gave it to him, and a very close friend of him handed it to him. So he's had it in his hands.
Okay.
And my hope was, you know what my hope was, you know, it didn't work, but I tried. The second hope was that there are people that are well aware of what's going on in Gaza. I don't even have words for how horrible it is. But there are still a lot of people, you know, sitting on the sidelines. And I'd like Americans to know, as you alluded to earlier, that there was once a president that didn't go along with everything Israel said and was completely capable of pushing back. We are not joined at the hip with Israel. We don't have some holy, sacred vow to defend them no matter what. They're just another country. They could be allies. They could be enemies, you know. And Kennedy understood that. I won't say he's the last president to understand that, but he was one of the last presidents to understand that. So I hoped to maybe interest a larger proportion of the U.S. population in the issue of the Middle East by connecting it to the president who many still love, who was murdered.
Ken, Jen, who, as I'm sure you know, was raised in this satanic cult, as I like to say, but in part, I think that the whole Israel project between 1948 and 1967 was relatively tame. Lord knows they were probably going to do it in very slow increments. But what ended up happening in 1967, I've maintained for a very long time that LBJ is one of the worst presidents we've ever had. And this is before I had any knowledge whatsoever about he may be the most Zionist president we've ever had. And the things that lead you to believe that perhaps he may have had something to do with Jack's assassination as well is not that far-fetched. But one of the things that you really hit on in this book is the fact that there is extensive documented evidence that Jack wanted to not only stop Israel's attempts at building a nuclear weapon, but he wanted what was the original incarnation of AIPAC to register as a foreign agent. And he went to great lengths with Ben-Gurion in order to do so. And he was getting stalwarted left and right. And this is the president of the United States at a time where it's the United States and the Soviet Union. There really is no other superpower in the world. So to basically go against the president's wishes in such a demonstrative way really makes one question, who was in fact backing up Ben-Gurion? And my guess is that, as you've alluded to in the book, there were quite a few people stateside that were doing so.
Yeah, I think stateside and the UK, of course. Yeah, and it was actually Robert Kennedy that was. So it was, both brothers were active. John was writing the various ever-shifting prime ministers of Israel, saying, "We got to look into that Dimona plant you've got, like now." And they were like, "Well, we'll pass your request on to us." I mean, the usual Zionist bullshit. And they were just stalling and stalling and stalling. And at one point, he said, "Look, our support for you is dependent on our ability to visit this site." Now, for people that don't know, Dimona is supposedly a nuclear research facility. But they, of course, were developing nuclear weapons. Kennedy had a lot of indications that was going on. He wanted to send inspectors. The Zionists were delaying. Meanwhile, his brother Robert, who at that time was Attorney General, was looking at, and I forget the name of the organization, Zionists of America or something like that. He was saying, "Look, you got to register, guys." And just for people to maybe not understand this whole process, if you're being paid by a foreign country to represent that country's interests in the U.S., it's okay. You just have to register. And the registration includes disclosing where all your money's coming from. And I believe this is true. If you gather with more than 3 people to disseminate the other country's message, you are required to send the transcript. If it's an article, if it's a speech, if it's a video, if it's a media appearance, that has to be sent to the State Department. So foreign agents are permitted, but they are very closely regulated. Now, of course, that whole thing's gone terribly wrong, but Israel doesn't even bother to register. And Robert F. Kennedy was working to get them to register. And they were, again, putting them off. This was all the summer of 1963.
Right. Coincidental. And what's interesting is I know it wasn't called AIPAC. It was whatever it was. It was something else. But what happened was they basically were going to be forced to have to register. And so they disbanded and then reformulated with like a new name and a new thing just to avoid.
Yeah.
So they were a whole new thing now. And so they've been skirting that for a really long time.
Indeed. And in fact, some people think that the prime ministers were changing. In other words, Ben-Gurion, Jack Kennedy was talking to Ben-Gurion, and then Ben-Gurion left, and then they brought in a new guy, Encol, I think was how you pronounce his name. And now then the negotiations started from scratch. And, you can see the letters in our book. We have the actual letters, the actual cables, the telegrams, the full text, but also the photo facsimiles. Many of these things were classified until relatively recently. And Americans just don't know that this was going on. And I call it a battle. I call it a secret battle because it was secret. And I call it a battle against Zionist extremism because these people were extremists.
So I see somebody in our chat. Wait, who is it? Okay. So Colinello's asking that there's lots of evidence pointing to the plot being driven by the military and the deep state. What evidence you have that Israel was also involved? And I don't know if any. I don't know why. Well,
I wrote a companion book. This was the first milder book that I wrote to send to Bobby, just to remind him that he's always talking about his uncle and his father.
Right.
And that's fair enough. They were his uncle and his father, but they were against these things. So I just made a short list of all the people, and you alluded to this earlier in the call, Jen. Here are all the people that wanted Kennedy dead.
Right.
The Texas establishment, which included the Bush family and Lyndon Johnson, the oil industry, because he was going after their depreciation allowance, and the oil industry profits massively from this crazy depreciation allowance. You take that away and they're less profitable. U.S. and global organized crime, because the Kennedys were after organized crime. Disgruntled ex and active CIA assassination and coup advocates and specialists, because a lot of them were fired. High-level participants in the global heroin trade, including the banks that finance it. The nuclear weapons industry didn't like him because he was trying to pull back on nuclear weapon development in the U.S. the arms industry as a whole, people with burning grudges against Castro's Cuba, including but not limited to Cuban emigres. Organized crime was very mad about what happened in Cuba. And so were the Bushes, who had a lot of money in Cuba, which people don't talk about. Industrialists, especially, but not limited to the steel industry. Extreme right-wing fanatics, including individuals with leadership roles in the U.S. military. The director for life of the FBI. And finally, the one no one ever mentions, supporters of Israel's covert program to become a nuclear power.
Huh.
Now, a lot of people are very informed about the first 11 that I listed.
Yeah.
And if you read a conspiracy book or go to a conspiracy conference or listen to a conspiracy podcast, they'll tell you about everything. You know, who shined Jack Ruby's shoes the day he shot Oswald. You can find out everything, but they will never mention this one element. Okay. And now we had a film that came out by Oliver Stone, JFK, which was a good film. And it was one of the first to introduce the idea of this deep state. It was one of the first to introduce the idea to the public that the Vietnam War was somehow a motivational factor. But who wrote the check for JFK, the movie? Because you always got to see who wrote the check. Right. A guy named Arnon Milchan. Arnon Milchan is one of the guys indicted with Benjamin Netanyahu right now. That's why, if we remember way back before this slaughter of innocents, Netanyahu was on his way to court, if not jail.
Yeah, for fraud, corruption, right? It was corruption charges.
And the corruptor was Arnon Milchan. Arnon Milchan is a brilliant man. That's what they say. He was involved in helping the Israelis steal nuclear technology secrets from the United States. He also became he's a very active and very successful film producer, and he wrote the check for Oliver Stone to do JFK. Oliver Stone will tell you this. He's aware of all the background now. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Because
I can't imagine he would like that now, like knowing that whole background now. I can't imagine. I mean, actually had him as a guest. We had Oliver Stone on.
Yeah, you can, if you search, he's an honest guy. Once he figured out what happened, he copped to it, but he didn't know at the time. You know, You're making a film. We all know this. You have a project, somebody's bringing you money. He looks okay. You know, they're not going to interfere. But clearly there was nothing mentioned about the fact that Israel was in a mad race to get nuclear weapons at the very same time that Kennedy was killed.
And I know we were against that. We were saying no.
Well, we were. You have to remember, Kennedy did the test ban treaty, and in his eyes, that was the first step to a freeze on nuclear development for weapons for all countries. And then he was talking with the Russians behind the scenes to start dismantling. That was the long-term goal, and it was a quixotic goal, an idealistic, ambitious goal. He wanted to eliminate nuclear weapons from the planet, and the first step. So he didn't want Israel or anyone else to have nuclear weapons. And remember, at that time, just England, just the U.S., France, us, China, and that was it. He didn't want a nuclear club to start.
Well, let's see how good I can channel this.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Let us re-examine our attitude towards the Soviet Union. It is discouraging to think that their leaders may actually believe that what the propagandists write. It is discouraging to read a recent authoritative Soviet text on military strategy and find, on page after page, wholly baseless and incredible claims, such as the allegation that American imperialist circles are preparing to unleash different types of wars, that there is a very real threat of a preventive war being unleashed by American imperialists against the Soviet Union, and that the political aims of the American imperialists are to enslave economically and politically the European and other capitalist countries, and to achieve world domination by any means of aggressive wars.
That was pretty good. It read more Matt Damon being JFK, but it was pretty good. Teresa liked it. You got $10.
There you go.
For that.
Anyone else? Thumbs up.
The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war. We do not want war. We do not want now or expect a war. This generation of Americans has already had enough, more than enough, of war and hate and oppression. We shall be prepared if others wish it. We shall be alert to try to stop it. But we shall also do our part to build a world of peace where the weak are safe and the strong are just. We are not helpless before the task of hopeless of its success. Confident and unafraid, we labor on, not toward a strategy of annihilation, but toward a strategy of peace.
How long is this speech you're giving of his?
I am reading the speech that, in my opinion, is what got him killed.
Okay.
The speech that he gave as the commencement I'm not going to read the whole speech.
But when was it? Give the context
June
of
10th, 1963, American University. The peace speech, as it has come to be known. There are other parts, statements that he made that I thought were obviously very powerful, including the one about the humanization of the Soviet people, about how we are all mortal and we all breathe the same air. And when you think about why it was so important that he gave this speech, I'm sure he had an idea by the summer of 63 that his life was in danger and that he wanted to be very clear about what his intentions were as far as what risks he was willing to take. He makes it very clear that his conversations with Ben-Gurion is to basically say, I already have enough to worry about with Khrushchev. I don't need to worry about your little passion project about greater Israel or whatever the hell it is you're trying to do here, which of course is what the 6-Day War was supposed to be. If not for the attack on the USS Liberty, which you so well document in this book, and I really want to get into that, Ken, because—
Can we? Because nobody talks about that enough.
This is a huge conversation that we've had with many MAGA libertarians who've come on our show. They are not in favor of what is going on with Israel. They're actually pretty dead set against it, including our friend CanCon, who's in South Florida, who is a Marine. They're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place right now, because we've been saying that when it comes to Trump, everything is it's 100% transactional. You take $100 million from the biggest Zionist in the entire world, Miriam Adelson. Yeah. You're not getting that money because she's trying to win you an election. She's giving you that money so that you can annex the West Bank. That is the whole point of the transaction. And I do think people are having a really hard time coming to terms with what this whole greater Israel mission is. And so much of what you write about regarding the cover-up, specifically by LBJ, regarding the USS Liberty attack. Never has there been a maritime attack in our nation's history that got swept under the rug. This is the only one. There's never been anything else. And it was so substantial at the time that they really thought that it could have been the end of the Israel, of the Jewish state, if you will.
It should have probably been. If it had been any other country, it probably would have been.
So if you can talk about that, I'd love to hear more insight.
Yeah, give a little background, because there's people that might not even know what the USS Liberty is. Yeah.
So the USS Liberty was called, what do they call it? A communication ship. And what it really was, this is a whole technical thing, but the NSA actually controls the military. I mean, the military can do whatever it wants, but when the NSA says we need you to do something, the military just does it. And there have been naval captains complaining about, hey, we're just taxi drivers for the NSA. So this was actually an NSA ship, a spy ship, manned by U.S. sailors, and they were surveilling what the heck was going on in Israel in this crazy war that they were conducting. That's what they do. And so the Israelis flew over it, and they had to know it was a U.S. Navy ship. It had a big American flag. It was painted the right colors. And they made the fiction that, oh, we think it's a Egyptian freighter that's been converted for wartime purposes, at which point they came and attacked the ship. The first thing they did was shoot down the communications devices. Then they napalmed the decks and machine gunned all the lifeboats. Then they sent torpedo boats to try to sink it. Luckily, the torpedo boats were not fully competent, and they failed to sink the boat. The other fortunate thing, if there was anything fortunate in this, is somebody managed somehow, by some miracle, to wire something together and send out a message even after all the telecommunication stuff was blown up. And that's when the U.S. Navy sent jets to go and rescue the ship. And McNamara, who's head of the Defense Department, ordered those planes back. And then another high-ranking military person in the Navy said, I'm not taking those planes back. I need to hear this from a higher source. And LBJ got on the phone and said, take those planes back. We're not going to embarrass our allies. And many, many men were killed, maimed. And they were then told when they got back to port, when the ship was dragged back to port, you talk about this and you are in deep, deep trouble. And so they, for the most part, kept to themselves about it. But many of them have now come out and explained everything. I mean, it's thoroughly documented. It was a deliberate attack by the state of Israel on U.S. Service people, murdering and maiming many of them. And LBJ was okay with it.
34 American soldiers were killed, 172 injured, casualty rate of 70%. Israel claimed mistaken identity. The ship's survivors were afraid to speak out in the early years because of threats of court-martial, prison, or worse. If they did not remain silent, Israel committed an act of war against the United States.
Yeah.
Orders to cover up the incident were issued by President Lyndon Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara.
How is that not treasonous?
It is.
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. And if I may divert, so that's the story. This is what happened.
Yeah.
It remains inexplicable that nobody's doing anything about it. But there was another act of treason that I talked about in this book, and it may explain part of the motivation for killing Kennedy and then later killing his brother. Because problem is, if his brother became president, he would then open up all the files. So we've been talking a lot about Israel's drive to get a nuclear weapons program going against U.S. wishes, against very clear, overt U.S. statements. They managed to steal some weapons-grade material from the United States, from a plant in western Pennsylvania, operated on behalf of the Navy by a private company, coincidentally owned by a Zionist. And that was a very important part of their nuclear weapons program. In this book, in another book, which is written by a buttoned up historian, no one's ever questioned anything in here. This is the biography of a guy named James Jesus Angleton. The author is Jeffrey Morley. He flatly states that James Jesus Angleton was involved in helping the Zionists steal and get this nuclear material. Now, who is James Jesus Angleton? He was none other than the director of counterintelligence for the CIA. So when people talk about rogue elements of the CIA, no, not rogue elements. People at the actual top of the CIA were involved. Now, Angleton has a really interesting history. Everybody talks about Dulles getting fired, and that's true. But Angleton didn't get fired. Angleton was appointed director, and I'll describe what counterintelligence is in a second. He was appointed by Dulles in the 50s. 5 different CIA directors came and went, and James Jesus Angleton sat in the seat of director of counterintelligence. So he was a lot like J. Edgar Hoover, with whom he had a professional relationship. It wasn't nothing could be cordial with Hoover, but they spoke regularly. He was a lot like Anthony Fauci, who was head of his little division of NIH for 40 straight years. But so Angleton was he was director of counterintelligence all the way through the mid 70s. And he was only taken out when he self-destructed. He became a crazed alcoholic, and it was just too much, and they had to get rid of him. But what does counterintelligence do? Okay, the first thing it does is it spies on the other spies. Counterintelligence. The other thing it does is protect your intelligence agency from being spied upon. Okay. The other thing it does is make sure all of your agency's activities are covert in their planning, in their operation, and for all time to come. This was the man who is the expert on keeping secrets, not for weeks, not for months, not for years, for decades. Israel considered him America's most important Zionist. Now, he wasn't Jewish. He was a WASP. He went to Yale like so many of the spooks do. He was probably anti-Semitic, but he was a Zionist because he believed we want our European thugs in the Middle East doing our bidding for us, right? The British believed this, and he believed it. So he was actually involved in helping steal. So we talk about being a traitor. We have the President of the United States working to pull back on nuclear weapons proliferation all over the world. He was specifically telling Israel not to do it. And the director of counterintelligence was helping Israel get the vital raw materials they needed to create this weapons program. Who had a very strong motivation to make sure Jack Kennedy didn't live too long? Had he been caught at that, noose around the neck, that's treason. That's a capital offense, and at that level, I think he would have been executed. So he had a little bit of a motivation. Now, there's some other. If you mind me riffing on this a little bit.
No, go ahead.
There's some other connections here. We've all heard of MK Ultra, I think. If not, MK Ultra was a vast program, sort of like the Manhattan Project, in that it employed thousands of people. It spent millions and millions of dollars, and it was done entirely covertly until somebody found out about it. And the goal was to do a number of things. They wanted to create drugs that would assist in interrogation, so nobody would be able to keep a secret. They wanted to be able to train their own people so that they would never break under torture. They wanted to be able to train people who could pass messages, because, you know, the passing of messages is always a very delicate matter. You don't want to write them down if you can, and encryption is good, but the best thing is to have it in the brain of one person and send them somewhere else and have them deliver it in person. They wanted to perfect that and have the deliverers not even remember who gave them the message in the first place. Some of this stuff sounds really weird, but if you actually study academic psychology, things like memory loss can be induced through hypnosis in certain types of people. So you have a large population, and within that population, there's always a few people that are highly hypnotizable. Sirhan Sirhan, for example, has been called one of the most, suggestible, hypnotizable subjects ever known to mankind, right? And so MK Ultra was also looking to train assassins. They wanted to create super soldiers. And they wanted to learn how to wipe people's minds completely clean and reprogram them to their own specifications. They had a horrific program that they funded at McGill University, where they would, I don't even want to you can read about it, but they'd give people, they'd give people the equivalent of 5 times the jolt of an electric shock, for electric shock treatment. Days and days and days in a row. They'd feed them all kinds of powerful drugs. They'd put headphones on their heads and have recordings over and over again. And the goal was to just, hey, can we completely vacate a person's soul and put in what we want? By the way, they found out they couldn't do it. They could destroy people, but they couldn't attain that great aim. But what they could do was they could find people that were highly susceptible to hypnosis and who would actually do things on command and forget that they did them and forget who instructed them to do them. Okay, sounds crazy, but this is doable. If you have enough money and enough time and you cast a wide enough net, you will find people with that level of susceptibility. Guess who was, Richard Helms ran that program. Guess who was Richard Helms' right-hand man in making sure that thing was kept secure? James Jesus Angleton. So if you needed a patsy to show up somewhere, and
who would you ask to give you a patsy? He would know who all the patsies.
It's just like going to the supermarket and picking one off the shelf. Now let's look at this. This is a question I've had for years and years and years. Of all the now we're switching to RFK. Of all the patsies they could have had, they picked a Palestinian. Now, Palestinians then and now are a very, very, very small minority in the United States. There ain't many of them, and there certainly weren't many back in the 60s. When they arrested Sirhan, he happened to conveniently have a clipping of a news item talking about RFK agreeing to give some kind of weapons to Israel. He happened to have that in his pocket. It happened to be a news clipping from weeks before. Okay, so of all the patsies they could have had, it appears that they picked a Palestinian to be the patsy. In what year? 1968. When was that? 1 year after the 1967 war and the attack on the Liberty, and Israel going into hyperdrive with Johnson's help to get on the course that they're on now. So I think that they like to do double. They're economical. Let's kill Robert Kennedy and let's pin it on a Palestinian. Now remember when they killed John Kennedy, who did they pin it on? A commie.
Russian agent. I was saying like an agent of the Soviets, right?
Now there was Lee Harvey Oswald was not the only Marine that went to Russia and posed as a defector. Believe it or not, there were others. That was a program. That program was run by, drum roll please, the Directorship of Counterintelligence. And the man behind that office is James Jesus Angleton. Now, very recently, let's see if I can find the name. They declassified something. And you may have noticed it. It was a minor item. The CIA had been reading Lee Harvey Oswald's letters. Do you remember when that became public? Relatively recently, a couple of years ago. They had kept that. They had kept that. So that obviously, if you're reading someone's letters, you must know they exist, right? Is that sort of, we have to just do that basic logic here because apparently the news media can't do it.
People also don't, just a quick interject. People also don't know that Oswald was traveling to Mexico City. Like there's just different things that.
Well, let me go off the track and go up on Mexico City, right? So the CIA has stations all over the world. If you're the head of a station, you're a station chief. Mexico City, people don't realize this. It's a little bit like Beirut, it's like it's a nest of spies. It's like a free fire zone for spies, right? Assassins are trained down there. So the station chief for Mexico City is a big deal, and that station supervises the entire of Latin America, so it's a big deal. The guy that was down there, a station chief, didn't like found something fishy about the Kennedy assassination. He mostly kept it to himself, but he occasionally talked to people about it, and he was writing a memoir. When that man died, the director of counterintelligence, James Jesus Angleton, personally got on a plane, went down to Mexico City, and browbeat his wife, the dead man's wife, into giving him all the copies of the memoir and allowing him free run of his library, and they carted everything out on a military jet. So James Jesus Angleton's job was to cover things up. And decades, this is more than a decade later after Kennedy's assassination, he was still on the job. And it was so important to him to make sure that this guy down in Mexico City hadn't left any loose ends, that he got on a plane and personally did it. But let's talk about the guy that was reading Oswald's letters. Why wouldn't they tell us his name? That was kept a secret until just a couple of years ago. What's the big deal? His name was Reuben Efron. Reuben Efron was a guy posing as a trade attorney, an expert in trade, based in Tel Aviv, flying back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv on a regular basis. He worked for the CIA. And when Oswald's wife was being interrogated by the commission, I forget it's a very famous commission. I can't think of the name.
The Warren Commission.
James Jesus Angleton had Efron sit in the room and watch the interrogation. Okay, so there are, by the way, so there's so many things to this. There are not one but two memorials to James Jesus Angleton in Israel. Okay, so here we have the man who's responsible for the CIA secrets. All right, he was helping the Israelis steal nuclear material from essentially from the U.S. Navy. A crime, treason. He was up to here in the MK Ultra program, and he was very active in the cover-up of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So, I ask everybody this question who's read 1,000,001 conspiracy books, as I did, and listened to 1,000,001 conspiracy podcasts. How many times does James Jesus Angleton's name come up? Yeah,
never.
And could that be because Arnon Milchan made sure the JFK movie went in a certain direction? Could that be? Now, here's some other weird stuff. We had the Church Committee. You know the Church Committee? That was back in the 70s. They were showing the connection between organized crime and the CIA. and the fact that they collaborated on the attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro. Okay, they brought in every Italian mafia guy that you could find. One guy was left alone, Meyer Lansky. Okay, now who's Meyer Lansky?
Now that I know, because I'm a Jew from Miami.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So for people that don't know, Meyer Lansky, along with Lucky Luciano, they are the guys that put organized into organized crime. Okay. Before that, it was a free for all. Hey, I'll steal from you. I'll hijack your beer truck. You know, I'll do this. I'll do that. And Lansky and Luciano said, guys, let's chill out. They had a meeting in Atlantic City and they said, okay, you get Boston, you get Providence, you get Detroit, if you don't cross each other's lines. Now, here's where it really gets interesting. If you cross each other's lines, we have something called Murder Incorporated, which a lot of people have heard of. And they think, oh, that's like 3 guys that used to kill people. No, that was a nationwide network of hitmen. And hitmen is just another word for assassin. It's just a linguistic sleight of hand. They're assassins, and they're really good. The other nickname for assassins or for hitmen is mechanic, because it's a skilled trade. You've got to do surveillance. You've got to you got to know where to catch the guy, where to hide, how to get away. There's a lot to know. So Meyer Lansky had, along with Lucky Luciano, a national network of hitmen. So if somebody misbehaved in Cleveland, they could call somebody from LA to come in and take care of that person for misbehaving. And they had a thing called the commission. We all get together, hash things out. There's a lot of talk that the mob killed Kennedy. Do you think that the mob would have killed Kennedy without holding a commission meeting? Do you think it was just like, they just say, oh, you kind of want to kill him. Let's just kill him. No. At that level, they would have had a meeting. Who would have been in that meeting? Well, all the major heads of the crime families and Meyer Lansky. But they never mentioned Meyer. His name rarely comes up as, and when they had the church committee meeting, I guess I think I mentioned earlier, he was never called. Even when they had the Kefauver committee, which was a thing that happened in the 50s, it was similar. They went from city to city. They had these live TV hearings and they exposed organized crime. Somehow, Meyer Lansky was never asked to come. Meyer Lansky got involved in a big problem with the IRS. It was sort of like an Al Capone situation. It's like, well, we can't get you for all the crimes you've done, but we can get you for all this money you didn't pay taxes on. At that point, he disappeared to the country of Israel. And he stayed there until he was able to pay off wherever he had to pay off. He was there for a couple of years. And then he came back to his favorite place on earth, Miami, and spent the rest of his life. He was also involved in providing arms illegally to Zionists during the World War II era. He also was involved. Lucky Luciano got pinched, was in jail, and Meyer Lansky knocked on the door of OSS, the forerunner of the CIA, and said, guys, listen, we control the docks. We could do so many good things for you, but you got to cut a break. You got to cut my friend Lucky a break. That was the beginning of the alliance between organized crime and intelligence. So James Jesus Angleton would have been very familiar with Meyer Lansky. The other piece of Meyer Lansky, which is really important to know, is they always called him the mob's accountant. Have you ever heard that? Or yes. The mob's banker. Oh, it's just, he just sat there and counted the numbers. Now you have to understand, like, crime is relatively easy, you know, if you're dedicated to it, right? And you know, you remember? Did you ever see that thing from Breaking Bad when they had this pallet of $100 bills in a storage unit, and they're like, "What do we do with this thing?" Okay, that becomes the ultimate problem of organized crime. And Al Capone went to jail for it. He spent the rest of his life in prison because the IRS got him. Meyer Lansky was the money launderer for the entire U.S. mafia. So all these Italian guys, and I'm half Italian, were running around, knocking themselves out, stealing all this money, piling it up. Meyer Lansky was the guy that helped them make it disappear. That's what it means when they say he's the mob's banker. And the business that they were in was heroin. Heroin has always been a very lucrative business. You make it for, you know, a penny and you sell it for $1, and it's addictive. That got him involved in overseas stuff, obviously, because think about this. you always see, hey, they just seized 10 tons of cocaine on a ship. You gotta step back and go, wow, who bought that cocaine on the other side? That must have been expensive. Who chartered that ship? Ships that size aren't cheap. Who got the crew together? That must have cost money. That's a banking function. And that's what Meyer Lansky did. Right? So he would have known when they say there was a collaboration between the CIA and organized crime, he would have been one of the people that had to have been helping, because he knew all the assassins. He knew how to launder money. He knew how to bring in foreign people. And apparently there were Corsicans involved in the assassination, and Corsicans were used to be very active and may still be in the heroin trade. So anyway, long story short, everybody deeply involved in the assassination, in my opinion, from what I can see, here's how I look at it. You're in a room with 10 dogs. The lights go out. A dog bites you. The lights go back on. You don't know which dog it was. How do you know? There's no eyewitness. There's no camera. You just measure the bite on your leg, and you measure the jaws of the 10 dogs. The jaw that fits is the dog that bit you.
Right.
There's really only one guy that could have managed the assassination and the cover up, which is committing a crime, very easy. Covering up a crime, difficult. Covering up a crime at that level, world-class skill involved. Who had the world-class skill? Our friend, James Jesus Singleton, director of counterintelligence. So it just so happens that the two of the guys that somehow have been kept out of the limelight, who had all the skills in the world necessary to kill Kennedy and cover it up, happen to be Zionists. They just happen to be. I don't think they did it for Israel, but they just happen to be Zionists. So that's kind of interesting information.
Yeah. So you're not saying it was like necessarily a Mossad situation as much as it was protecting what Israel was doing.
All right,
Here's the other crazy thing. Pardon me to interrupt. Who founded the Mossad? CIA. The CIA. Who trained the Mossad? The CIA. Who was one of their chief trainers? James Jesus Singleton.
Okay, so it's the same thing.
Yeah, and by the way, he probably was an anti-Semite. He was a total waspy guy, went to Yale, had all those attitudes. But part of the attitude was, let's put some headbangers in the Middle East that belong to us, so that when we need something, we can push a button and they'll go kill for us. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. That's the role of Israel in the world and with the U.S.
Part of the reason I think that Israel did organize and ultimately execute the assassination of JFK and RFK is because RFK Jr. refuses to scrutinize them in any way whatsoever, including his very unhealthy relationship with Rabbi Shmuley in such a context where it just doesn't make any sense. Like, it makes no sense. The most important part of your book comes in the latter part of the second third of the book, when you're talking about what is going on regarding the testimony from Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearings in the summer of 1963, leading up to just a couple of weeks prior to Jack's assassination. The Jewish Agency for Israel Incorporated and the Jewish Agency American Section Incorporated made payments to the American Zionist Organization, that is what ultimately became AIPAC.
That was AIPAC, yeah.
Which formed a substantial portion of the total budget of the organization. This is in 1961, 1962, and we're talking $5 million a year, which translated today is probably north of, I don't know, $15, $20 million, maybe more. The AZC constituted an agent of the Jewish Agency in Jerusalem under Section 1C2 of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. If such registration is not forthcoming, appropriate action should be taken to enforce such requests. As the letter from Assistant AG Yeagley wrote a month before Jack's assassination, attorneys for the American Zionist Council pleaded for not being required to register as foreign agents. It would eventually destroy the Zionist movement. In addition to that, April 1965, the Department of Justice accepts the American Zionist Council request to not be required to register as a foreign agent. November 1967, under the direction of President Johnson, AIPAC applies for a federal tax exemption. The U.S. Department of Treasury grants it, and it is backdated all the way to 1954. This is all about money and power. It just so happens to be cloaked in religious bullshit.
Oh, for real. I mean, it's make believe. That Zionism is Jewish is a make believe construct.
Completely.
It's Disneyland. It's a sinister Disneyland.
And the most sinister thing that you point out in this book about midway through, which just goes to show you that the only people who are truly interested, and I always like to point out somebody like Emily Austin. I'm sure you know who she is. Mm-hmm. This is a person who I met her, and I thought that she was a lot older than she was. I thought she was in her 30s. She was 20 when I met her. And this is a person who is so connected into the Mossad, into everything. And where did I meet her? I met her at JFK. It's amazing, the slip of the tongue. At RFK Jr.'s campaign launch in Philadelphia in October of 23. So this is right after what happened. Little did I know what it means to be in the upper echelons of society. Talk about somebody who's really connected. The higher up the ladder you go. The Zionist project is an elitist project if there ever was. It's the ultimate elitist project. And the thing that you point out in this book, which I thought was probably the most disturbing thing, when you talk about money and power, you talk about the lunacy of what the Zionist project wants Trump to do now, whether it's bargaining for Greenland.
Did you see he wants to change it to red, white, and blue land?
Listen, we've already changed it to the Gulf of America. We're totally taking back the Panama Canal, and we are going to make it the red, white, and blue land, and it will be totally incredible. The most disturbing part of this whole project is that they wanted alternate trade routes, but they knew that countries, particularly Syria, wanted no part of this. So the proposal, Jen, you're not going to believe this. The proposal was an alternate to the present-day Suez Canal. They were prepared to drop as many as 30 nuclear bombs in order to create an alternate waterway for trade routes that I think was to, the mouth was supposed to go across the Negev Desert. Nuclear holocaust is what they were willing to fuck around with in order to make a few more bucks because they didn't want to have to deal with countries that were not in favor of the Zionist project.
Yep, the proposal for using above ground nuclear bombs to build a canal, and it would, by the way, that canal would have terminated just north of Gaza, just a hair north of Gaza. The issue of the Suez Canal is a huge deal, because that's really the connection between Asia and Europe. You can go around Africa, but it's a lot more convenient to go through the Suez Canal. And it was a big deal for the British and French to control the Suez Canal, and they were pissed when Egypt nationalized it. And one of the ways, interestingly enough, that Israel made its bones was what military attacked Egypt after the nationalization of the Suez Canal. It wasn't the Brits, it wasn't the French, it was the Israeli army. And then they got engaged in a battle with the Egyptians, and then being the good guys they are, the British and French came in and separated them. But that's how that's one of the ways Israel showed, hey guys, we're your agents. We're going to do this for you. And they were rewarded, by the way, with nuclear technology from France for doing that. That's where that whole bowl got rolling.
When you think, and one last thing before you go, because I think that this clip is very important. When you think about the power of corporate media and the distortion that they have created amongst, they talk about misinformation is the catchphrase, is what I would call the safe word for privileged liberals in this country. Because for the most part, the type of misinformation that they don't want to talk about are things that make them uncomfortable. Right. That's ostensibly what it is. And so when the conversation came up the other day 2 days ago, as a matter of fact, pertaining to Trump's green lighting the release of about 2,000 documents regarding JFK's assassination. This was the reaction from CNN regarding such documents being released.
50-some years after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the FBI says it's uncovered more than 2,000 new records about the 1963 killing that were not previously known of. The Bureau said officials made the discovery after President Trump's executive order last month prompted them to launch a new search. CNN's Jamie Gangel and Evan Perez join us now. Jamie, what do these new records say? What is actually in them?
We don't know. Let's get that. So here are the numbers, which we do know. We're told it's about 2,400 documents, but 14,000.
Jen, did you go to school with her by any chance?
Wait, who is this?
Jamie, I'm breaking your chops. Jamie Gangel. I can't help it. I'm sorry, I just can't.
Why did you think her? I don't know.
So if you're a National Archives
because she wears it on her sleeve, that's why.
Nerd, that's about 6 boxes of documents. So what would we like to know? Of course, what's in them? We don't know yet. Where did they find them? We don't know yet. Why were they missing all of these years? We do not know yet. But eventually they will be turned over to the archives. And unless there's something that's very sensitive in national security, we should see them shortly.
Evan, this is obviously happening after President Trump ordered the release of these documents tied to the assassinations of JFK, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. He, in his first term, tried to unseal some of these documents, but ultimately was talked out of it by the CIA.
Yeah.
Are we actually going to see these documents this time, or could they get blocked again?
My prediction is that he's going to run into the same issue because there are still some national security secrets that are in these documents and this is why this is going to be like the forever Netflix show, right? We can forever, we'll have this mystery out there. Listen to Kash Patel, who says he took a look at these documents during the first administration. Listen to what he says about them.
I never believed that the CIA killed Kennedy.
No. You're talking to a guy that's read the entire JFK file.
You've seen all the secret stuff?
I've seen all of that, and I've seen the 7 pages of the 9/11 report. I've seen it all.
And what he goes on to say here is that the documents that are being withheld don't answer the questions that we all have, or that certainly are fueling the conspiracy theories. And by the way, those are still alive today. As a matter of fact, apparently today in Congress, Representative Ana Paulina Luna, a representative from Florida, are back in where we are from.
Me too.
And you, that's right. She addressed some of the issues and the questions that persist to this day. Listen to this.
I can tell you, based on what I've been seeing so far, the initial hearing that was actually held here in Congress was actually faulty in the single bullet theory. I believe that there were 2 shooters, and we should be finding more information as we are able to gain access into the SCIF, hopefully before the files are actually released to the public.
I mean, look, so to be clear, we've seen no evidence to indicate that there's anything to this, right? But, to Jamie's point, we've got these boxes that have been found. It appears that what happened with the FBI is that, you had old records that were not filed correctly or categorized correctly, so they didn't know they existed until an order from President Biden to digitize these documents. And so that's how they found these additional.
Honestly, we don't need to hear anymore. To me, these people just talk in circles. The whole goal is to whitewash history. The fact of the matter is they're more concerned about making fun of the fact that this somewhat of a floozy girl made it to the United States Congress and is in a very powerful position and says that there were 2 shooters. And he's like, yeah, there's no evidence that there were 2 shooters. Of course he would say something like that, even though all ballistic records and everything with regards to Parkland Hospital said that the shots came from the back end.
Why did he even say, I didn't hear him criticizing her. I actually found her to be, I saw something from her yesterday. I think I saw the same thing yesterday or whatever, but I found her to be very capable and competent sounding.
But he was kind of minimizing her, I thought. But I want to make a point here. If let's say we go to war somewhere, and different guys are pulling triggers and stuff's happening. We don't ask who was in the foxhole that pulled the trigger that hit that guy. We ask who ordered it, who organized it, right? So we can endlessly chase our tails about, was it 2, was it 3, was it 1, was it 5, and they love that. They love the conspiracy community going wild over every little detail, and they never ask the basic questions. And this is basic law, right? Who had the means? Who had the motive? Lots of people had a motive. Who had the means? And the means included being able to move Lee Harvey Oswald around, because he was somehow involved, maybe probably a patsy, but somebody was moving him around, and then someone has covered it up for how many years is it now? 60 plus years. There's only one group of people that has that means within the United States, and that's the CIA. And there's a department within the CIA called counterintelligence. And I want to raise this. If we're running are we towards the end? Should I sum it up? Let me sum it up this way. They got rid of James Jesus Angleton because of his alcoholism, and he was going literally mad. They didn't fire his deputies or his lieutenants. And just as James Jesus Angleton stayed in the CIA for a decade plus after Dulles was pulled out, all his people stayed in the CIA with the same attitude, the same view of the world, of Earth, and they recruited and trained people. So if there were a real good assassination research community, what they would be doing right now is doing a genealogy. Who was James Jesus Angleton's closest lieutenants? Where are they now? Who did they recruit and train? Where are they now? Those are the malignant elements in the United States government. And those guys obviously get a clear pass, because I bet I'm the first person you've ever heard raise this issue.
Yeah, for sure.
This is an extremely thorough and thought-provoking book. I highly recommend that people pick it up. If they haven't already. Let's
description. It's in our link in description, guys.
It's a nice-looking book too.
That was a photo that's in public domain. We were surprised to find it.
Nice.
Yeah. No, they definitely, that he was an impactful president because people still talk about him and revere him today in a way that you only hear about, in my opinion, with 4 other presidents: Washington, Lincoln, and the 2 Roosevelts. And the one line that I think is a line that you just had to throw in there, which I thought was interesting, which is one of the speeches. When I think of the worst president in American history, it's easy to say Andrew Johnson. I think most people would probably say Andrew Johnson. In terms of the impact that he made pre-industrial revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Post-industrial revolution, there is no worse president than Woodrow Wilson. And
right. I got that one right, yeah.
And I want to remind people that blame Teddy Roosevelt for Woodrow Wilson becoming president. Never forget, if anybody was upset at what the Democratic Party, led by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who we're going to get to shortly, did to Bernie Sanders, the GOP did the same thing to Teddy Roosevelt when he ran against Taft, who was president at the time, in the Republican primary, and he beat him. And then the delegates decided, now we're still going with Taft anyway. So if you think we've ever really had a democracy, we haven't. It's just an illusion. Eventually, the American people have to wake up and realize that not everything is as seems. We have an idea of what we want America to be, but it's not really what it is. And the story of JFK, to me, epitomizes that almost to a T. And for you to come on this evening and talk about it, we really appreciate it. And we really appreciate I can only imagine how many hours and months and sleepless nights went into putting all of this information together. It's also not easy to track down. But the fact that you did is a testament to your hard work, and you should absolutely be celebrated for all of it.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's an important story, and my dream is all Americans will know it one day.
I appreciate that. And just as for you to know, Peter, Ken is always working. He's always writing. He's always researching. He's all like, do you not? Am I wrong?
I do sleep, but from the time I wake up till the time I go to sleep, I'm pretty much working.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's fun stuff. It's important. We have a beautiful country with beautiful people, and we should do the right thing.
I think so too.
Amen.
Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. I appreciate knowing you.
Well, thanks for having me. You're at the vanguard of people willing to have me on the air.
Excellent.
Listen, we're already demonetized, so it doesn't matter. So we've already
Right?
we've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Thank you so much, Ken.
Thank
Keep
you,
fighting
Ken.
with